Every day, a scruffy stray dog wandered along the edge of a busy highway, scavenging for anything edible to survive. One afternoon, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, the dog trotted along the gravel-strewn shoulder of the road. His coat, a patchwork of brown and white, was matted with dirt, and his ribs showed through his thin frame. Yet, there was a determined glint in his eyes, a silent resilience that had carried him through countless days of solitude and hunger. On this particular evening, the rumble of motorcycles echoed down the highway. A pack of bikers, leather-clad and roaring with laughter, cruised along, their engines drowning out the chirping of crickets. They were the kind of group that turned heads, loud, brash, and unbothered by the world around them. As they slowed near a rest stop, their leader, a burly man with a thick beard and a patch on his jacket reading Taunt, caught sight of the dog. "Look at that mangy mutt," Taunt hollered, his voice carrying over the noise of the idling engines. The others pulled up beside him, their bikes forming a semicircle around the animal. The dog froze, his ears flattening against his head, unsure of whether these humans were friend or foe. "What's he doing out here?" chuckled one of the bikers, a wiry man with a skull tattoo on his neck. He tossed a half-eaten sandwich toward the dog, who sniffed it cautiously before retreating a few steps. "Not even hungry, huh? Picky for a stray," another biker sneered. The dog didn't bark or growl. He simply stared at them, his eyes a mixture of curiosity and weariness. His silence seemed to amuse the group even more. They began to jeer, clapping and making exaggerated barking sounds. A few even revved their engines to spook him. But the dog stood his ground, unflinching. Taunt leaned forward on his handlebars, narrowing his eyes at the dog. "You got guts, don't you? Let's see how long that lasts." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small firecracker, lighting it with a flick of his lighter. He tossed it a few feet away from the dog. The explosion sent a sharp crack through the air, and for a moment, the dog darted away, his tail tucked between his legs. But then something remarkable happened. Instead of fleeing into the bushes as most strays would, the dog stopped and turned back toward the group. His tail wagged hesitantly, as if trying to understand the strange humans. His amber eyes met Taunt's, and for a brief second, the biker's smug expression faltered. "What the hell? Is he coming back?" one of the bikers murmured, a hint of unease creeping into his voice. The dog walked slowly toward them, his head low, not in submission, but in cautious trust. He sniffed at the boot of the biker closest to him, then looked up, his tail giving a small wag. "Well, I'll be damned," Taunt muttered, shaking his head. "This mutt's got more nerve than half the guys I ride with." The group laughed, but their tone was different now, less mocking, more bewildered. Taunt, despite himself, crouched down and extended a hand. "You're not scared of anything, are you, boy?" The dog didn't flinch, inching closer to sniff Taunt's outstretched hand. For a moment, there was a flicker of connection between the two, a quiet acknowledgement of shared resilience. But it was fleeting. One of the bikers, impatient and wanting to keep moving, revved his engine loudly, startling the dog back a few paces. "Come on, Taunt, let's roll. We don't have time for strays." Taunt straightened, his face hardening again as he looked at the dog. "Yeah, you're right. Let's ride." As the bikers roared off, their taunts carried by the wind, the dog stood there, watching their retreating forms. But he didn't linger long. After a few moments, he turned and trotted toward a cluster of nearby trees, his movements purposeful, almost as if he had a destination in mind. Unbeknownst to the bikers, the stray had seen them before. He knew the rumble of their engines and the scent of their leather jackets. He had been watching, learning, waiting. And now, with their laughter still echoing in the distance, the dog disappeared into the shadows, his next move already forming in his mind. The bikers sped down the highway, the fading light casting long shadows behind them. They were headed toward a secluded spot near an abandoned gas station, a place they frequented to unwind after their rides. The laughter from their encounter with the stray dog still echoed among them, each one recounting the moment as if it were the highlight of their day. "That mutt's got more guts than brains," chuckled Snake, the wiry biker with the skull tattoo. "I've seen bigger dogs run from us." Talon smirked, but his mind wandered. He couldn't shake the way the dog had looked at him, calm, steady, almost understanding. It was unsettling, and for reasons he couldn't quite explain, it lingered like an itch he couldn't scratch. They reached the gas station as the first stars began to dot the night sky. It was a desolate place, its pumps long dry and the cracked asphalt littered with weeds. They parked their bikes in a loose circle and settled in, passing around drinks and lighting up cigarettes. "Cheers to another ride," one of them shouted, raising a can of beer. The group erupted in cheers, their voices breaking the stillness of the night. But amidst their rowdy camaraderie, none of them noticed the pair of glowing amber eyes watching from the darkness. The stray had followed them. From the cover of the bushes, the dog observed the group with a focused intensity. This wasn't the first time he tracked them to this location. Over the past few weeks, he had watched the bikers come and go, learning their routines and noting the items they carried. A half-eaten burger here, a discarded bone there, it was often his only source of food. Tonight, however, the dog seemed less interested in scavenging and more intent on something else. As the bikers continued their revelry, the dog slinked closer, his movements silent and deliberate. He navigated the shadows with ease, his lean frame blending seamlessly with the night. His destination was clear, a pile of saddlebags stacked near the bikes. The bags were an eclectic mix, some brimming with tools, others with leather jackets and spare parts. One in particular emitted a faint scent that made the dog pause, a mix of smoke and something acrid. Snake, still laughing at some crude joke, happened to glance toward the bikes. His laughter stopped short, replaced by a sharp intake of breath. "Hey, Talon," he muttered, nudging the leader. "That dog, it's here." The others turned, their drunken chatter fading as they spotted the stray standing near their bikes, his head tilted slightly, as if daring them to react. "You've got to be kidding me," Talon said, standing up and dusting off his jeans. "What's he doing here?" "I don't know," Snake replied, his voice low. "But I don't like it." The bikers watched in stunned silence as the dog sniffed at one of the saddlebags, then lifted his head to look at them, his eyes gleaming in the dim light. He didn't run or bark. He simply stood his ground, his presence an unspoken challenge. "That's enough," growled Talon, reaching for a nearby wrench. "I'm not dealing with this mutt again." Before he could take a step, the dog moved. Grabbing the strap of the bag he had been eyeing, he yanked it with surprising strength. The bag tumbled to the ground, its contents spilling out. Among the scattered tools and clothes, a small packet wrapped in black tape rolled free. "What the?" Snake began, but his words were cut short as Talon grabbed the packet and inspected it. His face darkened as he turned to the others. "This isn't mine," Talon said sharply, holding up the packet. The group exchanged uneasy glances. "That's from the last job," another biker mumbled, his voice barely audible. "You said we'd keep it here until—" "Shut up!" Talon barked, his eyes darting to the shadows where the dog had been. But the stray was gone, having retreated into the darkness with the same quiet precision that had brought him there. The biker's tension grew palpable. Snake stepped forward, his usual bravado replaced by a nervous edge. "You think someone sent that dog? Like, to spy on us?" "Don't be stupid," Talon snapped, though his tone betrayed his own uncertainty. He tossed the packet back into the saddlebag and zipped it shut. "Let's pack up and get out of here. I don't like this." As the bikers hastily gathered their belongings, the dog watched from his hidden perch, his keen eyes following their every move. He could sense their unease, the cracks forming in their facade. And as the sound of their motorcycles roared back to life, the dog turned and disappeared into the woods. For the bikers, it was just another strange encounter. But for the dog, it was a calculated move, a step closer to something they could never have anticipated. The bikers didn't go far that night. Their unease lingered as they rode to another spot, a small clearing near the edge of the woods that served as their makeshift hideout. The faint rustle of leaves and the occasional hoot of an owl accompanied them as they settled into a tense silence. Talon paced near his bike, his usual confident demeanor replaced by something colder, sharper. "That dog's no ordinary stray," he said, more to himself than anyone else. "There's something off about it." Snake rolled his eyes, attempting to shake off the tension. "Come on, man, it's just a dog. Maybe it wanted food. Maybe it smelled something in the bag. Doesn't mean it's got a vendetta." But Talon wasn't convinced. "You saw how it looked at us. That's not normal. It knew something. And that bag," he stopped mid-sentence, his jaw tightening. "We can't risk this getting out." The others exchanged uneasy glances. The packet, now carefully hidden again, was their biggest liability. It was proof of their involvement in something far darker than they usually let on. The bikers had made their share of enemies, and the idea of someone using a dog to spy on them wasn't as far-fetched as it might have seemed a few days ago. Meanwhile, deep in the woods, the dog was on the move. His pace was steady, his ears twitching at the faintest sounds. He had a destination in mind, a place he had frequented before. His body, lean from years of survival, moved like a shadow through the underbrush until he reached a small clearing lit by the soft glow of moonlight. In the clearing stood an old man, his face weathered but kind. He knelt down as the dog approached, running a hand over the stray's coarse fur. "You're back," the man murmured. "And I bet you've got a story to tell." The dog nudged the man's hand, then moved to a small pile of belongings near a makeshift campsite. He sniffed around, eventually dragging out a piece of fabric that still carried the faint scent of the packet from the saddlebag. The man crouched beside him, holding the fabric to his nose. A frown creased his face. "Drugs," the man muttered, his tone darkening. "So, it's them again." The old man wasn't just any recluse living in the woods. He was a retired park ranger, someone who had spent decades observing and understanding the land and its inhabitants. After his retirement, he had chosen to live a quieter life, but trouble had a way of finding him, and it seemed to have found him once more. "This isn't just about you, is it?" he said, looking at the dog. "You've been watching them, haven't you?" The dog wagged his tail faintly, a silent confirmation. The old man stood, his movements deliberate. He knew the woods better than anyone, and he had seen his fair share of shady activity over the years. If these bikers were up to something, and if this stray had taken an interest in them, it wasn't just a coincidence. He rummaged through his belongings, retrieving a battered notebook and a small flashlight. Flipping through the pages, he found entries about the bikers, notes on their comings and goings, descriptions of their patterns, and even rough sketches of their bikes. "They've been sloppy," he murmured, mostly to himself. "And if they're carrying what I think they are, this is bigger than just a few late-night rides." Back at the clearing, the bikers were growing restless. Snake leaned against his bike, lighting a cigarette with shaky hands. "So, what's the plan, Talon? We can't just sit around waiting for a dog to take us down." "We get rid of it," Talon said bluntly. "Next time we see it, we finish this. No more games." The others nodded, though the unease in their eyes betrayed their doubts. None of them wanted to admit it, but the dog had unnerved them in ways they couldn't explain. As the bikers debated their next move, the dog and the old man were already one step ahead. The man packed his few belongings into a weathered backpack and whistled softly. The dog perked up, his ears twitching as he stepped closer. "Let's pay them a visit," the man said. "Time to see just how brave they are without their bikes and their bravado." The pair moved through the woods with practiced ease, the man's flashlight illuminating just enough of the path ahead. They weren't heading directly for the bikers' clearing, not yet. Instead, the old man had a different plan. He led the dog to a vantage point overlooking the bikers, a spot where they could observe without being seen. Through the dense foliage, the man saw the group clustered around their bikes. The tension was palpable, even from a distance. He noticed how their laughter had faded, replaced by hushed conversations and restless movements. "These aren't men looking for trouble," the old man muttered, more to himself than the dog. "These are men running from it." His gaze fell on the saddlebags again, his sharp eyes picking out the one the dog had targeted earlier. Whatever was inside had to be important enough to make these men nervous. And nervous men made mistakes. The dog whined softly, drawing the man's attention. "Patience," he said, scratching behind the dog's ears. "We'll make our move when the time is right." And with that, the first phase of their silent resistance began. The bikers' clearing was eerily quiet as the night deepened, their unease growing with every passing hour. Talon remained restless, pacing back and forth, his boots crunching against the dry leaves. His mind raced with possibilities, each one more unsettling than the last. The others had begun to grumble under their breath, their bravado wearing thin in the face of an unseen threat. "This is ridiculous," Snake finally said, breaking the tense silence. "We're running scared from a dog and some bad luck. It's just paranoia." Talon shot him a glare. "Paranoia? You don't get it. This isn't about luck." That stray was too focused, too deliberate. It knew what it was doing. Snake laughed bitterly, the sound hollow. "Now you're losing it, man." Before Talon could respond, a distant sound cut through the night, a low, guttural growl. Every head turned toward the noise, their eyes scanning the shadows that encroached on the clearing. Snake's smirk faltered as his hand instinctively moved toward the knife at his belt. "See? That's exactly what I'm talking about," Talon hissed, pulling a flashlight from his jacket. "It's out there, watching us." The beam of light cut through the darkness, sweeping across the surrounding trees. Branches swayed in the breeze, their shadows dancing ominously, but nothing moved. The bikers exchanged weary glances, their earlier skepticism beginning to crack. "What if it's not alone?" one of the younger bikers, named Axel, muttered, his voice trembling slightly, betraying his nerves. "What if someone sent it?" Talon clenched his jaw, his grip tightening on the flashlight. "Doesn't matter. We deal with the dog, and whoever's behind it won't stand a chance." Meanwhile, the old man and the stray dog watched the scene unfold from their hidden vantage point. The man had noted the bikers' increasing agitation, their bravado fading with each noise and shadow. He couldn't help but feel a pang of satisfaction. Fear was a powerful tool, one he had learned to wield over decades of dealing with poachers and criminals in the wilderness. "You've done a good job rattling them," he whispered to the dog, who sat alert at his side. The dog's ears twitched in response, his eyes fixed on the clearing below. The man carefully adjusted his position, ensuring he remained hidden. His sharp eyes caught the flicker of a flashlight beam and the nervous shifting of the bikers. "They're cracking," he murmured. "Now we just need to push a little harder." Reaching into his backpack, he pulled out a small handheld device, a wildlife sound emitter he had used during his years as a ranger. It could mimic the calls of various animals, from wolves to coyotes. Tonight, it would serve a different purpose. With a few adjustments, the device emitted a low, menacing growl that echoed through the woods. The bikers froze, their heads snapping toward the sound. Talon's flashlight wavered, the beam trembling as his grip faltered. "What the hell was that?" Axel whispered, his voice barely audible. Snake tried to laugh it off. "Probably just a coyote. Happens all the time out here." Another growl sounded, this time closer. The bikers instinctively huddled together, their earlier confidence dissolving into fear. As the bikers grew more paranoid, the old man whispered to the dog, "Time for phase 2. He clicked the device again, this time producing the sharp snap of a twig breaking underfoot. The sound came from the opposite direction of the growl, creating the illusion of something, or someone, circling the clearing. The bikers spun around, their eyes darting toward the source of the noise. Snake drew his knife, his hand shaking slightly. Okay, this isn't funny anymore. If someone's out there, show yourself. Talon gritted his teeth, his frustration boiling over. Shut up, Snake. Whoever it is, they're playing with us. We're not giving them the satisfaction. But the tension was too much for Axel, who suddenly bolted toward his bike. I'm not sticking around to find out. This isn't worth it. Axel, get back here. Talon barked, but it was too late. The younger biker gunned his engine and sped off into the night, his taillight quickly disappearing into the distance. The remaining bikers stood in stunned silence, their group dynamic now fractured. Talon cursed under his breath, kicking at a rock in frustration. Great. Just great. Now we've got a coward on our hands. The old man watched Axel's retreat with a calculated smile. One down, he muttered, scratching the dog behind the ears. Let's see how long the rest hold out. Back in the clearing, Talon tried to regain control of the situation. Listen up, he growled, his voice low and commanding. We stick together. No more running off like scared kids. Whatever's out there, we deal with it. Got it? The remaining bikers nodded reluctantly, though their fear was palpable. The atmosphere in the clearing had shifted. The camaraderie they once shared was replaced by suspicion and unease. The dog whined softly, drawing the old man's attention. He followed the dog's gaze to the saddlebags, where the faint outline of the contraband could still be seen. You haven't forgotten about that, have you? The man said, a hint of admiration in his voice. Smart pup. The old man settled back into the shadows, his mind already working on the next step. The bikers were unraveling, their unity crumbling under the weight of fear and paranoia. It wouldn't take much more to push them over the edge. And when that moment came, he and the dog would be ready. The night deepened, and the bikers' clearing grew even more tense. Talon paced back and forth like a caged animal, his every movement sharp and aggressive. Snake leaned against his bike, muttering complaints under his breath, while the others sat around the dying embers of their campfire, their faces illuminated by the flickering orange glow. The oppressive darkness of the forest seemed to close in, its shadows alive with the sounds of the night. A distant howl cut through the silence, low and haunting. The sound sent a shiver down Snake's spine, though he tried to hide it with a gruff laugh. This is getting ridiculous. We're jumping at every little sound. It's just a stupid dog. It's not just a dog, Talon snapped, his voice hard. You saw what it did to Axel, spooked him so bad he ran out of here with his tail between his legs. That's not normal. Snake rolled his eyes. Axel's a kid. He couldn't handle the heat. Doesn't mean we have to sit here waiting for whatever it is you think is out there. Before Talon could reply, the sound of rustling leaves snapped their attention to the edge of the clearing. Flashlights flicked on, beams sweeping across the dense underbrush. For a moment, nothing moved. Then, a shadow darted just beyond the light's reach, a swift, silent blur that disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. Did you see that? One of the bikers whispered, his voice trembling. Talon didn't answer. He was already moving toward the spot, his flashlight steady in his hand. The beam revealed only trees and tangled foliage, but the unease in his gut grew stronger. What are you doing, man? Snake called after him. Stay in the clearing. Talon ignored him, stepping deeper into the forest. The trees seemed to close in around him, their twisted branches forming a canopy that blocked out the moonlight. His heart pounded as he scanned the darkness, searching for the source of the movement. For the first time in years, he felt something he didn't recognize at first, genuine fear. From his hidden vantage point, the old man watched Talon's reckless advance with a shake of his head. Impatience, he muttered. That'll be his undoing. The dog at his side whined softly, its ears pricking up at the faint sound of movement. The old man followed the dog's gaze and spotted Snake, who had reluctantly left the clearing to follow Talon. A grim smile tugged at his lips. And there goes another one. He adjusted the sound emitter in his hand, setting it to a series of low, guttural growls. The noise seemed to emanate from the trees, bouncing off the trunks and creating the illusion of an approaching pack. Snake froze in his tracks, his flashlight beam trembling as it swept across the forest. Talon, he hissed, his bravado gone. We've got company. Talon turned to glare at him, his jaw clenched. You're imagining things. The growls grew louder, closer. Talon's confidence faltered for a split second before he steeled himself. Stay close, he ordered, his voice low. If something's out there, we face it together. Back at the clearing, the remaining bikers huddled closer to the fire, their nerves fraying, their patience wearing thin. One of them, a wiry man named Buck, stood abruptly, kicking dirt onto the embers. I'm not sitting here waiting to get picked off. I'm out. Another biker, heavier set and visibly shaken, shot him a panicked look. You can't just leave. What if whatever's out there comes after you? Buck glared at him. I'd rather take my chances out there than sit here like a sitting duck. He grabbed his helmet and started toward his bike, but before he could reach it, a low bark echoed through the clearing. Buck froze, his eyes wide as he scanned the darkness. The bark came again, louder this time, followed by the sound of snapping twigs. Then, out of the shadows, the stray dog appeared, its golden eyes gleaming in the firelight. It stood at the edge of the clearing, its body low to the ground, muscles taut like a coiled spring. The bikers stared at it, their bravado crumbling in the face of its piercing gaze. It didn't growl or bare its teeth. It simply watched them, its presence unnervingly calm. What's it doing? The heavier biker stammered. Buck took a hesitant step back. I don't know, but I'm not sticking around to find out. As he turned to mount his bike, the dog darted forward, cutting him off with astonishing speed. It stood between him and his escape, its body blocking the path like a silent warning. The old man chuckled softly, impressed by the dog's instincts. Good boy, he murmured. Keep them guessing. He could see the panic spreading through the group, their fear of the unknown turning into a palpable tension. They were falling apart, their unity crumbling under the pressure. Now for the final push, he said, pulling out a small flare from his pack. He struck it, the red flame sparking to life, and tossed it into the clearing. The bikers jumped as the flare landed, its bright light casting long, flickering shadows across the trees. The dog used the momentary distraction to retreat back into the darkness, leaving the group to face the unsettling scene alone. Buck was the first to snap. That's it. I'm out of here. He shoved past the others, his panic infectious as he revved his bike and tore out of the clearing. His departure left the remaining bikers even more shaken, their fragile confidence shattered. The old man watched Buck's retreat with satisfaction. Another one down, he whispered. Now let's see how long the rest hold out. As the sound of Buck's motorcycle faded into the distance, the remaining bikers stood frozen, caught between their bravado and a growing sense of unease. Snake returned to the clearing, dragging Talon with him. The two looked rattled, their earlier swagger replaced with grim determination. What the hell is going on here? Snake demanded, his voice breaking the tense silence. That's not just a dog. There's something else out there. Talon shot him a sharp look, trying to regain control of the situation. It's just your imagination. Buck ran because he's weak, and now you're letting this place mess with your head. Snake pointed to the edge of the clearing where the flare still burned brightly. That wasn't my imagination. Someone threw that. Someone's toying with us. One of the younger bikers, Jesse, finally broke down. I didn't sign up for this, man. We came out for a quick score, not some horror movie in the woods. Talon's jaw tightened. He could feel the group slipping away, their fear eroding his authority. He glanced around, his sharp eyes searching for anything that might give him an edge. "Nobody's leaving," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "We stick together and ride this out. Whatever's out there, we'll face it as a crew." Snake snorted, crossing his arms. "Face it? You don't even know what it is. For all we know, it's not just the dog. Maybe there's some lunatic out there setting us up. Then we find them," Talon snapped, stepping closer to Snake, his voice dripping with menace. "You want to walk out there alone? Be my guest. But I promise you, if you run, you're on your own." From his hiding spot, the old man watched the group unravel. He could see the tension simmering between Talon and Snake, their leadership dynamic shifting under the weight of fear. It wouldn't take much to push them over the edge. Beside him, the dog whined softly, its golden eyes fixed on the bikers. The old man rested a hand on its head, his touch steady and reassuring. "Patience, boy. Let them destroy themselves first." He reached into his pack and pulled out another device, this one rigged to produce a high-pitched whistle. It was barely audible to human ears, but the dog perked up immediately, understanding its role. The old man activated the device, and the dog darted back into the clearing with purpose, circling the bikers just out of reach. Its movements were swift and calculated, designed to disorient and unsettle them further. Jesse was the first to react, spinning in circles as he tried to track the dog's movements. "It's watching us," he shouted, his voice tinged with panic. "Why is it just watching us?" "Shut up," Talon barked, but even his composure was starting to crack. He turned to Snake. "Get a weapon. We're ending this now." Snake hesitated, glancing toward the edge of the clearing where the dog had disappeared. "And what if there's more out there? What if it's not just the dog? You want to sit here waiting to find out?" Talon shot back. "We're not prey, Snake. We're predators. Time to act like it." But before Snake could reply, the dog reappeared, its sudden presence startling the group. It stood in the center of the clearing now, its stance firm and unyielding, its golden eyes locked onto Talon, daring him to make the first move. "What are you waiting for?" Jesse whimpered, inching closer to Snake. "Do something." Talon gritted his teeth and stepped forward, his flashlight beam fixed on the dog. "Enough games," he growled. "Time to teach this mutt a lesson." But as he raised his arm, the dog let out a low, guttural growl that froze him in his tracks. The sound wasn't loud, but it carried an unnatural weight, reverberating through the clearing like a warning. Snake, unable to hold back his fear, grabbed Talon's arm. "Don't. Something's not right. That's not a normal dog." Talon yanked his arm free, his pride unwilling to back down. "It's just a stray," he insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. "Nothing more." The dog took a step closer, its growl deepening. Its golden eyes seemed to pierce through Talon, challenging his authority in a way no human ever had. For the first time, Talon hesitated, his confidence faltering under the weight of that unwavering gaze. The old man watched with quiet satisfaction, his hand resting on the control panel of the whistle device. The dog's movements were precise, every growl and step calculated to manipulate the biker's emotions. Fear, doubt, anger, it was all part of the plan. "They're close," he murmured to himself. "Just a little more." He adjusted the device, activating a secondary frequency. In the distance, another howl echoed through the forest, this one louder and more menacing. The bikers whipped around, their flashlights darting wildly through the darkness. "There's more of them," Jesse whispered, his voice trembling. "Oh God, there's more of them." Talon clenched his fists, his knuckles white. He could feel the group slipping further into chaos, their unity unraveling with every passing moment. He had to act, had to regain control. But as he turned back toward the dog, he found it standing even closer, its growl rumbling like distant thunder. Snake stepped back, his voice barely audible. "We're not in control here, Talon. Whatever's happening, it's bigger than us." Talon's eyes darted between the dog and his crew, his mind racing. For the first time, he realized Snake might be right. They weren't predators anymore. They were prey. The oppressive silence of the forest was shattered by the echo of another distant howl, this one deeper and more resonant, as if the night itself was alive. The bikers clustered together instinctively, their earlier bravado crumbling like dry leaves underfoot. Talon's flashlight flickered as he scanned the surrounding trees, his grip tightening on the handle. "What's the plan now, fearless leader?" Snake hissed, his voice dripping with sarcasm and fear. Talon ignored him, focusing instead on the dog still standing in the clearing, its gaze never wavering. The golden eyes seemed to glow faintly, as if reflecting a light that wasn't there. It was unnatural, and for the first time, Talon felt the cold grip of doubt creeping into his mind. From the edge of the forest, the old man adjusted his whistle device again, dialing up the intensity. A second dog emerged from the shadows, its sleek form cutting through the darkness like a phantom. This one was larger, its fur a stark black that seemed to absorb the moonlight. It stopped just behind the golden-eyed dog, its growl harmonizing with its companions. The bikers recoiled, a mix of disbelief and terror spreading among them. "Two of them now," Jesse stammered, gripping Snake's arm. "This isn't normal. This isn't normal." "Get a grip," Talon barked, though his voice betrayed his unease. "It's just two dogs. We can handle this." "Can we?" Snake shot back, his eyes darting nervously. "You still think this is just some random stray? Look at them, Talon. They're working together, like they're planning something." The old man smirked as he activated another frequency on the device. The sound was inaudible to human ears, but the dogs responded immediately. The golden-eyed one barked sharply, and the black-furred one disappeared back into the shadows, its movement so seamless it seemed to vanish into the forest itself. The bikers froze, unsure whether to take the bark as a threat or a signal. The golden-eyed dog remained, its steady gaze locked onto Talon, as if daring him to take a step closer. "What's it doing now?" Jesse whispered, his voice barely audible. "It's testing us," Snake muttered, his expression grim. "Trying to see how we react." "Since when did you become a dog expert?" Talon snapped, his frustration boiling over. But even as he spoke, he found himself unable to look away from the dog's piercing stare. The tension reached a boiling point when a rustling sound emerged from the underbrush behind them. The bikers spun around, flashlights darting through the trees, but instead of finding the source of the noise, their beams only illuminated the dense thicket, shadows dancing like taunting specters. Snake took a step back, his bravado evaporating. "We're surrounded," he whispered, panic edging into his voice. "It's not just two dogs. There's more of them out there." Talon gritted his teeth, his knuckles white around the handle of his flashlight. He wanted to dismiss Snake's fears as nonsense, but deep down, he knew his crew was right. Something was out there, something deliberate, something calculated, and it was watching them. A low growl rumbled from the forest, this time from a different direction. Then another. And another. Until the clearing was surrounded by an invisible wall of sound. The bikers pressed together, their bravado replaced by raw fear. Jesse's voice cracked as he broke the silence. "We need to leave. Now." "We're not leaving," Talon growled, though his confidence was fading. "Not until we figure out what's going on here." "What's going on?" Snake snapped, his voice rising. "What's going on is that we're being hunted, Talon. And you're too stubborn to admit it." The old man watched with satisfaction as the bikers began to turn on each other. Fear was a powerful tool, and he wielded it like a master craftsman. He tapped a button on the whistle device, summoning the black dog back into the clearing. This time, it didn't growl. It simply stood beside its companion, its presence enough to deepen the biker's unease. The golden-eyed dog barked again, and the black dog moved toward the edge of the clearing, as if pointing to a specific spot. The bikers hesitated, unsure whether to follow the cue or ignore it. But the golden-eyed dog remained still, its gaze unyielding. "What's it doing now?" Jesse whispered, his voice trembling. "Trying to lead us somewhere. Or maybe it's a trap," Snake guessed. Talon hesitated, torn between his instinct to act and the growing realization that he might be in over his head. Finally, he made a decision. "Fine," he said, his voice firm despite his fear. "We follow the dog. But we stay together, and we keep our weapons ready." As the bikers reluctantly followed the black dog, the golden-eyed one trailed behind them, its presence an unspoken warning not to stray from the group. The forest seemed to close in around them, the darkness growing thicker with each step. Every sound, a snapping twig, a rustling leaf, felt magnified, their nerves stretched to the breaking point. The old man followed at a distance, his whistle device still in hand. He knew the forest better than anyone, and he guided the dogs with precision, leading the bikers deeper into the trap he had set. "They're almost ready," he murmured, his voice low and steady. "Just a little further." The group stumbled into another clearing, this one dominated by a massive, gnarled tree. The black dog stopped abruptly, turning to face them with an expression that almost seemed expectant. The golden-eyed dog circled the group, its growl a constant reminder of their precarious situation. "What now?" Snake demanded, his voice breaking. Before Talon could respond, a new sound filled the air, a deep, resonant bark that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The bikers froze, their fear reaching its peak. This was no ordinary dog. This was something else entirely. The clearing was unnaturally still, the bikers breathing loud and uneven as they scanned the dark surroundings. The golden-eyed dog sat down, its gaze never leaving them, while the black dog prowled the edge of the clearing, every step deliberate and measured. Above, the twisted branches of the massive tree loomed like the skeletal fingers of a long-dead giant. Talon gripped his flashlight tighter, his jaw set. "We're not playing your game," he muttered under his breath, as if addressing the dogs themselves. Yet, despite his attempt at defiance, he couldn't shake the feeling that the dogs were in control, and that they were waiting for something. Back in the shadows, the old man adjusted his position, crouching behind the thick trunk of a tree. His keen eyes flicked between the bikers and the dogs. The golden-eyed one had done its job well, corralling the intruders like an expert shepherd. The black dog's circling was no random display, it was a test of boundaries, keeping the bikers within the space where the trap would unfold. "Let's see how bold you are now," the old man muttered as he raised the whistle device to his lips. Another deep bark erupted from the forest, shaking the clearing like a rolling wave. This time, it was louder, more commanding, and it carried an air of authority that sent chills down the bikers' spines. The sound seemed to ripple through the air, causing the leaves to tremble and the bikers to instinctively huddle closer together. Talon, Jesse's hands trembled as he whispered, "We need to go. Now." But before Talon could answer, the golden-eyed dog stood and took a step forward. The motion was subtle, almost casual, but it silenced Jesse instantly. The dog's expression was calm, yet unnervingly intelligent, its eyes locking onto Talon with an intensity that froze him in place. "What is this thing?" Snake murmured, his voice cracking. "It's just a dog," Talon growled, though his words lacked conviction. "Just a stray trying to scare us." "Does that look like any stray you've ever seen?" Jesse countered, his voice rising in panic. As the tension among the bikers escalated, the black dog stopped its pacing and let out a low, guttural growl. From the shadows beyond the clearing, more shapes began to emerge, silent, fluid, and deliberate. One by one, a pack of dogs appeared, each one unique in size and color, but all moving with the same eerie precision. Their eyes glinted in the dim light as they formed a loose perimeter around the bikers. Talon's defiance cracked. His flashlight beam trembled as he swept it across the pack. There were at least 8 dogs now, their presence both ominous and coordinated. They weren't behaving like animals. They were behaving like soldiers. "They're surrounding us," Jesse whimpered, backing towards Snake. "We're not getting out of here alive." The old man smiled grimly as he watched the pack take its positions. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the culmination of years spent training his loyal companions. He pressed another button on the whistle device, and the golden-eyed dog barked sharply, its signal cutting through the oppressive silence. The bikers flinched as the golden-eyed dog barked, but what followed was even more unnerving. The pack responded in unison, their voices blending into a chorus of howls and barks that reverberated through the clearing. The sound wasn't random. It was a message, a warning, and it left no room for doubt. Talon clenched his fists, his fear now mingled with anger. "I don't know who's behind this, but we're not going down without a fight." He reached for the pocket knife he always carried, flicking it open with a sharp click. The black dog growled louder, its body lowering into a stance that radiated danger. The pack followed suit, their growls harmonizing like an orchestra preparing for a climactic finale. "Talon, don't," Snake warned, his eyes wide with fear. "This isn't something we can fight." "We'll see about that," Talon spat, stepping forward with the knife in hand. But before he could move any closer to the dogs, the golden-eyed one let out a single, piercing bark. The sound was like a command, and the effect was immediate. The pack surged forward, not in an attack, but in a calculated display of dominance. They stopped just short of the bikers, their proximity forcing the group into a tighter huddle. Talon raised his knife instinctively, but the golden-eyed dog's steady gaze made him hesitate. It wasn't fear that rooted him in place. It was something deeper, something primal. "These dogs," Jesse stammered, his voice barely audible. "They're not normal." "You think?" Snake snapped, his panic now bordering on hysteria. The old man stepped into the clearing, his silhouette framed by the moonlight. The whistle device hung from his neck, and his hands rested calmly at his sides. The dogs parted as he approached, their growls subsiding as they deferred to their master. "Well, well," the old man said, his voice low and measured. "You thought you could mock a stray and get away with it." The bikers stared at him in stunned silence, their fear now mixed with confusion. Talon lowered his knife slightly, his voice shaking as he demanded, "Who the hell are you?" The old man ignored the question, his attention focused on the golden-eyed dog. He knelt beside it, scratching behind its ears as he spoke. "This one's smarter than all of you combined. He saw through your cruelty and led you here for a reason." "For what?" Snake blurted. "What do you want from us?" The old man stood slowly, his gaze hardening. "Justice." The word justice lingered in the air, cutting through the biker's panicked thoughts like a blade. The old man's tone carried the weight of authority, and the bikers couldn't help but feel like children caught in the act of some great wrongdoing. Talon's grip tightened on his knife, though his knuckles were white with tension. "Justice," he spat, forcing bravado into his voice. "You can't just sick a pack of strays on us and call it justice." The old man took a deliberate step forward, the golden-eyed dog staying close to his side. "Justice isn't about vengeance, boy," he said, his tone calm but firm. "It's about balance. And tonight, you've tipped that balance too far." Behind the bikers, the pack closed ranks, their silent presence forcing the group to remain rooted in place. Snake looked around frantically, his breathing rapid and uneven. "This isn't happening," he muttered. "This can't be real." "It's real," Jesse whispered back, his voice trembling. "And we need to listen. We don't have another choice." "Listen to what?" Talon growled, his frustration boiling over. "This old man and his mangy dogs, they can't touch us. At that, the black dog barked, a deep, guttural sound that made Talon flinch despite himself. The old man smiled faintly, though there was no humor in it. You still don't get it, do you? You think you're the predator in this story. But you're not. The old man reached into his pocket, pulling out a weathered photo. He held it up for the bikers to see, a picture of a young boy with a radiant smile, standing beside the golden-eyed dog. The boy's arm was slung around the dog's neck, their bond unmistakable. This dog, the old man began, his voice heavy with emotion, is more than a stray. His name is Alex. He's been my companion, my protector, and my family since he was a pup. And that night by the highway, he wasn't looking for scraps. He was looking for you. The bikers exchanged uneasy glances, their confidence crumbling under the weight of the old man's words. Alex saw what you did, the old man continued, his voice hardening. The mocking. The kicks. The way you laughed as if his life meant nothing. But Alex isn't like you. He didn't respond with hate. He responded with purpose. Talon shook his head, his defiance faltering. This is insane. It's just a dog. Just a dog, the old man echoed, his eyes narrowing. Let me tell you what just a dog can do. He gestured to the pack surrounding them. Every one of these dogs has a story. Abandoned. Abused. Forgotten. And every one of them found their way to me. Together, we've built something you wouldn't understand, a family. A pack. The golden-eyed dog, Alex, stepped forward, his gaze locking onto Talon. For the first time, Talon saw something in the dog's eyes that made his blood run cold, intelligence, judgment, and something else, a silent question. What will you do now? I don't care about your stories, Talon snapped, though his voice quivered. We'll walk out of here, and there's nothing you or your dogs can do to stop us. The old man sighed, a look of genuine disappointment crossing his face. You still don't get it. You're not walking out of here until you make things right. What does that even mean? Snake demanded, his voice cracking. The old man tilted his head slightly, as if considering the question. It means taking responsibility. For Alex. For the others. And for yourselves. The clearing seemed to grow darker, the weight of the old man's words pressing down on the bikers. Jesse, who had been silent for several moments, finally broke. He's right, he whispered. We messed up, Talon. We need to fix this. Shut up, Talon barked, turning his glare on Jesse. You're just scared. Yeah, I am, Jesse shot back, his voice rising. But that doesn't mean I'm wrong. Look at us. We're surrounded. We're outnumbered. And we're in the wrong. Snake nodded reluctantly, his fear finally overcoming his pride. He's got a point, Talon. Maybe it's time we stop fighting. Talon's defiance wavered, his grip on the knife loosening. He looked around at the pack, their eyes watching his every move. He looked at the old man, who stood calmly, waiting. And finally, he looked at Alex, the dog he had mocked, the dog who had led him here. With a frustrated growl, Talon dropped the knife. Fine, he said. What do you want from us? The old man's expression softened slightly, though his posture remained firm. First, an apology. To Alex. To the pack. And to yourselves. Admit what you've done, and mean it. Talon scoffed, but Jesse stepped forward, his voice trembling as he said, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for things to go this far. Snake followed, his voice barely above a whisper. Me too. I was wrong. All eyes turned to Talon, who hesitated before finally muttering, I'm sorry. The old man nodded, his face unreadable. That's a start. But words are cheap. Actions matter more. What kind of actions? Talon asked warily. You'll see, the old man replied. Alex brought you here for a reason. Now it's time to find out if you can truly change. The atmosphere remained heavy as the bikers stood surrounded by the silent, watchful pack. The old man's words hung in the air, demanding more than just a muttered apology. Talon's hands clenched into fists, his pride warring with the fear that crept deeper into his bones. Snake and Jesse exchanged uneasy glances, their expressions betraying the weight of guilt now pressing down on them. "What now?" Talon finally asked, his voice rough. "You've got your apology. Isn't that enough?" The old man tilted his head, his gaze unrelenting. "An apology is a good start, but it's not enough. You need to understand the harm you've caused, and take steps to make it right." Talon scoffed. "Make it right? How? You want us to join your little pack? Start barking at the moon?" Jesse, visibly shaken, stepped forward before the old man could respond. "Stop it, Talon," he snapped. "Just stop. For once, think about someone other than yourself." Talon opened his mouth to retort, but Jesse cut him off. "You don't see it, do you? These dogs, they didn't choose this life. They didn't ask to be abandoned or hurt or treated like trash. But here they are, working together, surviving, because someone cared enough to give them a chance." Snake nodded hesitantly, his voice breaking the silence. "Yeah. And maybe that's what we need too. A chance to fix things." The old man watched them carefully, his eyes softening but still sharp. "Every creature deserves a second chance. But it has to be earned. Alex believes you're worth saving, or he wouldn't have brought you here." Alex, as if sensing his name, stepped forward, his golden eyes locked onto Talon's, silently commanding his attention. For a long moment, the two stared at each other, and Talon felt something stir inside him, a memory, unbidden, of a dog he'd once owned as a child. A dog he'd loved but had lost to neglect, and his family moved and left it behind. "I didn't mean to hurt him," Talon muttered, his voice barely audible. "I didn't mean any of it." The old man nodded slowly. "Harm is harm, whether it's intentional or not. But if you're willing to take responsibility, there's still hope." Jesse stepped closer to the old man, his resolve growing. "What do we need to do?" "Follow me," the old man said, his voice calm but firm. He turned and began walking, the pack parting to allow him through. Alex stayed close at his side, his tail swishing gently, as if he trusted the bikers to follow. Talon hesitated, his pride still wrestling with his conscience. Snake nudged him. "Come on, man. What's the alternative? Run? Fight? We're not getting out of this without doing what he asks." Reluctantly, Talon took a step forward, then another. Jesse and Snake followed, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. The pack moved with them, silent and watchful, their presence an unspoken reminder of the consequences of turning back. The old man led them deeper into the forest, the moonlight filtering through the trees in silvery beams. They arrived at a clearing where a small, rustic shelter stood. The structure was simple but sturdy, surrounded by makeshift kennels and fenced areas. Inside, the soft whimpers and curious barks of other dogs could be heard. "This is the sanctuary," the old man said, gesturing around him. "It's where I take in dogs who have nowhere else to go. It's where they heal. And it's where they learn that not all humans are bad." Jesse's gaze swept over the area, his guilt deepening as he took in the evidence of care and compassion that contrasted starkly with their own actions. Snake shifted uncomfortably, his shoulders hunched. Even Talon seemed subdued, his bravado dimmed by the sight before him. "What do you want us to do here?" Snake asked cautiously. The old man's expression softened, but his tone remained resolute. "You're going to help. Every dog here needs something: food, water, exercise, comfort. You're going to provide it. You're going to learn what it means to care for another life." Talon bristled. So you're turning us into kennel boys? This is some kind of punishment. The old man shook his head. It's not punishment. It's a lesson. If you can't find compassion in your heart for these animals, then there's no hope for you. But if you can, well, maybe there's more to you than what I saw on that highway. Jesse stepped forward, his voice steady. I'll do it. Whatever it takes. Snake nodded, his resolve growing. Me too. I'm tired of feeling like the bad guy. All eyes turned to Talon. For a moment, he stood frozen, the weight of expectation pressing down on him. Then, with a heavy sigh, he muttered, Fine. I'll help. But don't expect me to like it. The old man nodded approvingly. You don't have to like it. You just have to do it. He handed each of them a task, feeding the dogs, cleaning the kennels, preparing fresh bedding. At first, their movements were clumsy, hesitant, and begrudging. But as the night wore on, something began to change. The dogs, initially wary, started to approach, their trust growing with each kind gesture. And the bikers, to their own surprise, began to soften. Jesse found himself laughing as a playful pup tugged at his sleeve. Snake crouched down to pet an older dog, his usual smirk replaced by a genuine smile. Even Talon, though reluctant, felt a strange warmth as Alex leaned against him, his golden eyes full of understanding. By the time the first rays of dawn broke through the trees, the bikers were exhausted, but transformed. The old man stood watching, a quiet pride in his gaze. You've taken the first step, he said. But the road to redemption is long. The question is, will you keep walking it? Talon glanced at his companions, then at Alex. For the first time in a long while, he felt a glimmer of something he thought he'd lost, hope. As the sun rose higher, casting warm light over the sanctuary, the reality of the biker situation settled in. They had spent the night working alongside the old man, caring for the dogs they had once mocked. The labor had been physically demanding and emotionally humbling, but now a question loomed over them, was this truly enough to make amends? The old man stood at the edge of the clearing, leaning against the wooden fence. His gaze was fixed on the bikers, who sat on the ground, surrounded by tired but content dogs. Alex, ever loyal, lay at Talon's feet, his golden eyes watching him with quiet trust. You've done good work, the old man began, his voice carrying both approval and challenge. But one night of effort doesn't erase what you've done. The question now is, what happens next? Jesse spoke up first, his voice steady but tinged with uncertainty. I don't know. I don't want to go back to the way things were. Hurting people, causing trouble, it doesn't feel right anymore. Snake nodded in agreement, his usual bravado replaced with a surprising vulnerability. Yeah. I guess I don't want to be that guy anymore. But how do we even start over? The old man's gaze softened, and he nodded slowly. Starting over isn't easy. It takes time, effort, and commitment. But the fact that you're asking that question means there's hope for you yet. Talon remained silent, his expression unreadable. His hands rested on his knees, fingers idly scratching behind Alex's ears. He seemed deep in thought, wrestling with emotions he couldn't quite articulate. Finally, he looked up at the old man. What if we're not cut out for this? Talon asked, his voice quiet but edged with uncertainty. What if we screw up again? The old man smiled faintly. Then you pick yourself up and try again. Redemption isn't about being perfect. It's about making the choice to be better, every single day. Alex let out a soft bark, breaking the momentary silence. He nudged Talon's hand with his nose, his tail wagging slightly, as if urging him forward. Talon sighed, shaking his head. This dog, he muttered, a hint of a smile creeping onto his face. He's too good for us. The old man's expression grew serious. That's the thing about dogs. They see the best in us, even when we can't see it in ourselves. Alex believes in you. Maybe it's time you start living up to what he sees in you. The weight of those words seemed to settle over Talon, Jesse, and Snake. For the first time, they weren't just running from their past. They were considering a future that could be different. "I'll stay," Jesse said suddenly, his voice firm. "If you'll have me, I want to keep helping. I want to learn from you, from them." He gestured toward the dogs, who were now lying peacefully around the clearing. Snake hesitated, glancing at Talon before nodding. "Me too. I'm tired of living like I've got nothing to lose. Maybe it's time to find something worth holding on to." Talon was the last to speak, his voice low but steady. "I don't know if I can change," he admitted. "But I'm willing to try." The old man studied them for a long moment before nodding. "Trying is enough, for now." He extended his hand to each of them, and they shook it in turn, a silent agreement passing between them. This was their chance, not just to make amends, but to rebuild their lives. It wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in years, they had a purpose. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. The bikers continued their work, assisting the old man with the morning routines at the sanctuary. They fed the dogs, cleaned the kennels, and even repaired a section of the fence that had been damaged during a storm. Each task, though small, felt significant, a step toward redemption. By midday, the old man called them together once more. He held a small wooden box in his hands, and his expression was thoughtful. "Before you go," he said, "I want to give you something." He opened the box, revealing a collection of handmade tags, each etched with a dog's name. "These belong to the dogs you've helped today," he explained. "They carry their stories, their pain and their resilience. Keep them as a reminder of what you've learned here, and of the lives you've touched." Jesse and Snake accepted their tags with gratitude, their expressions solemn. When it was Talon's turn, he hesitated. His gaze lingered on the tag marked Alex, and he looked up at the old man, his voice thick with emotion. "What about him?" Talon asked. Does he need a new home?" The old man smiled, his eyes twinkling with understanding. "Alex has a home here. But if you're asking whether he'd go with you," he trailed off, looking at the dog. Alex wagged his tail, his golden eyes locking onto Talon's. The answer was clear. Talon swallowed hard, then nodded. "I'll take care of him. I'll make it right." The old man's smile widened. "I believe you will." As the bikers prepared to leave the sanctuary, Alex trotted alongside Talon, his tail wagging with excitement. Jesse and Snake exchanged a glance, a newfound determination in their eyes. The old man watched them go, his heart heavy but hopeful. He knew the road ahead would be difficult for them, but he also knew that redemption wasn't a straight path. It was a journey, one step at a time. As they disappeared down the dirt road, Alex looked back once, his golden eyes meeting the old man's. It was as if he was saying goodbye, not just to the sanctuary, but to the past. The sound of the motorbikes echoed through the empty countryside as Talon, Jesse, and Snake rode in silence. Alex perched securely in the makeshift sidecar attached to Talon's bike. The morning sunlight glinted off the chrome, painting the scene with an air of renewal. None of the three men spoke as they traveled the winding road away from the sanctuary, but the weight of their shared experience was palpable. As the group approached a rest stop near the highway, they pulled over, each lost in their own thoughts. Alex hopped out of the sidecar and began sniffing around, his tail wagging with unbridled enthusiasm. It was the kind of joy that only a dog could embody, a joy untethered to the complexities of human regret or hope. Talon sat on the edge of a picnic bench, his gaze distant as he absent-mindedly stroked Alex's fur. Jesse and Snake leaned against their bikes, their leather jackets weathered but somehow less imposing now. They had reached a crossroads, not just on the road, but in their lives. "I don't want to go back to that life," Jesse admitted, breaking the silence. "I know we've got a long way to go, but I don't think I can keep riding with the crew, doing what we used to do. It just doesn't feel right anymore. Snake nodded, crossing his arms. Same here. I used to think being tough was all that mattered. But last night, his voice trailed off as he glanced toward Alex, who was now lying contentedly at Talon's feet. Last night showed me what real strength looks like. It's not about scaring people. It's about standing for something. Talon listened quietly, his jaw tightening. He knew they were right, but he also knew the weight of their choices. Walking away from their old life wasn't as simple as hopping on their bikes and riding off into the sunset. The crew wouldn't just let them go. They'd want answers. Worse, they might want revenge. What do we even do next? Snake asked, his voice heavy with uncertainty. We're not exactly saints, and it's not like people are going to forget what we've done. Talon stood up, his gaze fixed on the horizon. We start by owning it, he said firmly. We don't run from what we did. We face it, make it right where we can. And if the crew comes after us, he glanced down at Alex, who looked up at him with unwavering trust. Then we stand together. Like we did last night. The determination in his voice struck a chord with Jesse and Snake. For the first time, they weren't just riding for themselves. They were riding for a purpose. The three men climbed back onto their bikes, the roar of the engines shattering the stillness of the morning. But as they prepared to leave, they noticed a car pulling into the rest stop. The vehicle was dented and old, its tires kicking up dust as it came to a halt. A middle-aged man stepped out, his face lined with exhaustion and worry. He glanced around nervously before his eyes fell on Alex. That dog, the man said, his voice trembling. That's Alex. The three bikers froze, stunned by the man's words. Talon dismounted, his hand instinctively resting on Alex's head. What do you mean? He's yours, he asked cautiously. The man approached slowly, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. I've been looking for him for months, he explained. We were in a car accident. He ran off, and I thought I'd never see him again. His eyes filled with tears as he crouched down, holding out his hand to Alex. Alex, buddy. It's me. It's Dad. Alex hesitated for a moment before bounding toward the man, his tail wagging furiously. The man embraced the dog, burying his face in Alex's fur. I can't believe it, he whispered. I thought I'd lost you forever. Talon, Jesse, and Snake watched the reunion in silence, their emotions a complicated mix of relief and loss. Alex had been their companion, their anchor in the storm of their own redemption. Letting him go felt like losing a piece of themselves. But as Talon stepped forward, he realized something profound. He's your family, he said quietly, his voice steady. And he deserves to be with you. The man looked up, gratitude and disbelief etched on his face. Thank you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I don't know what you've been through with him, but thank you for keeping him safe. As the man loaded Alex into the car, the dog looked back at Talon, his golden eyes filled with something that almost resembled understanding. Talon raised a hand in a silent farewell, watching as the car drove away, taking Alex back to the life he belonged to. The three bikers stood in the dust, the silence between them heavy but not empty. They had done something good, something right. And though the road ahead was uncertain, they knew they had taken the first step toward being the men they wanted to be. Ready to go? Jesse asked, breaking the silence. Talon nodded, climbing onto his bike. Yeah, he said, his voice resolute. Let's ride. As the three engines roared to life, they pulled back onto the highway, leaving the rest stop, and their past selves, behind. In the distance, the sun climbed higher, lighting their path toward an uncertain but hopeful future. The highway stretched out ahead of Talon, Jesse, and Snake, a ribbon of endless possibilities. As the roar of their engines faded into the quiet hum of the open road, each man felt the weight of the past easing with every mile. They had made a choice, to leave behind a life of violence and take a stand for something better. Though their journey was just beginning, the change within them was undeniable. The day after Alex's emotional reunion with his rightful owner, the trio stopped in a small diner by the side of the road. It was the kind of place they used to intimidate, but now they walked in without the swagger of the past. The waitress eyed them cautiously as they slid into a booth, their leather jackets still signaling trouble to those who didn't know better. "Coffee?" she asked hesitantly. "Please," Talon replied with a polite nod, his voice calm, steady, almost unrecognizable from the man he had been weeks ago. The waitress seemed surprised, her weariness giving way to a tentative smile. As they waited for their food, Jesse glanced out the window at a family piling into their car. A small dog wagged its tail furiously as it jumped into the back seat with the children. Jesse smiled faintly. "You think Alex is happy?" he asked. Talon looked up from his coffee. "Yeah," he said. "He's where he belongs. He's got a family, a home. That's what matters." Snake, uncharacteristically quiet, traced a crack in the table with his finger. "Think we'll ever find something like that? A place to belong?" Talon leaned back, his gaze distant. "Maybe. But I think it's not about finding a place. It's about becoming the kind of people who can belong anywhere." The conversation hung in the air, the weight of their transformation evident. They weren't just running from their old lives. They were rebuilding themselves, one choice at a time. The road ahead wasn't just a physical journey. It was a path to redemption, a chance to make amends for the pain they had caused. After paying their bill and thanking the waitress, they stepped outside, the sun warm on their faces. Jesse stretched, his leather jacket creaking. "So, where to next?" Talon smirked. "Wherever the road takes us." The trio mounted their bikes, the engines roaring to life once again. As they pulled onto the highway, a sense of purpose filled the air. They didn't know where they were headed, but they knew why they were riding. They had chosen to change, to be better. Meanwhile, Alex had settled into his new, old, life with his owner, bringing joy and healing to the man who had missed him so deeply. Though the dog's time with the bikers was brief, the impact was lasting. Alex had shown them a kind of loyalty and forgiveness they didn't think they deserved, and that simple, unconditional love had set them on a new course. If this story touched you, consider subscribing to our channel for more inspiring tales of transformation and hope. Alex may have changed the lives of these bikers, but every day, there are countless animals and people with stories waiting to be told. Don't miss out on the next chapter. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you're the first to hear it. And if you want to help other stray animals like Alex find their happy ending, check out the resources linked below. Together, we can make a difference. See you in the next video.